Right, so thank you very much, Simon and Seaton, for coming up to the fields, where I've been spending quite a lot of time learning about the estate, learning about the ecology of the estate, and more importantly the potential that this land has in order to become more wild in plants and species, and secondly to imagine a space that is more connected to people and land. The most important thing that I want to bring into the conversation is the lack of consciousness towards the biodiversity problem worldwide. In the climate change problem, biodiversity loss is our greatest and most significant problem. And this is something that I really want to wake in myself, to be like, okay, this is where I need to come from, and I need to make a difference, because it seems unmanageable. But if we can create it into a manageable solution, we can begin to change the story. The story at the moment is human-centered, and it's not looking at all the things that we need that support us. That if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be here. So the important part of this assignment for me was to note that, and begin from that, and then use that passion to try and direct a focus for the land of Dartington in such a way that it allows Dartington to thrive in biodiversity. So the first phase of my project was to just walk the land and go and see what things are here. Everything from the roe deer to the kingfisher to the badger that are on the estate. And then I used my imagination to try and bring in what else could be here in the future. So then walking the estate, I looked at what part of the estate would best be able to manage a rewilding exercise. And I looked down at Queen's Marsh, which is just beyond this field. This field over here has been marked and proposed for agroforestry. And then the fields below are the farmers' fields, which are connected by two forests, two sides of them, two forests where I've seen holes in the fences where foxes and badgers try to come across to get to the other side. There's big barbed wire fences that I can only imagine are damaging them and hurting them. So the first phase would be like, how would we begin to solve the problem of the edge? The edge, if you understand what an ecotone is the relationship between one ecosystem when it meets another one. And that's where lots of biodiversity thrives. So looking at the edges of the fences, how do we begin to look at a new form of fence that allows for biodiversity to move around and not be so affected? I mean, if you have a look in the distance there, you can see that hedgerow that is connecting that forest and that forest. That in itself is already creating a corridor between the one forest and the other side of the forest. But how could we possibly make those bigger and better so that it's more manageable for animals to move across? And not only does it allow for animals to cross, but it creates habitat for birds, beautiful birds that sit in those hedgerows. But that's just phase one at looking at the relationship. The second is looking at the marshland, and if you go down to the bottom is Queen's Marsh. It's a beautiful marsh that used to be home to many different types of flowers, and at the moment it's sitting very on its own and fenced up, quite barbarically, in the sense that that's the feeling that I got, because it could be home to a lot more than it is. And I think that we are not only separating nature from nature, but nature from ourselves when we create this divide. So it's looking from a humble point of view, how do we begin to look at this problem in a different way? So the marshland, the river that runs through the marsh actually used to run through the marsh and not on the other side of the marsh, which means that river is being tightened and restricted, almost like an elastic band coming around your hand and your arm. How can we begin to open up that river to, as we go back to the edge, to open itself to more biodiversity that could then come to the river and then flow towards the dart, and just open up that artery back to the river? So that would then look at the marshland and how we could maybe develop from an economic point of view, how could we create finance for the estate at the marshland. For example, creating planting trees, planting different types of flowers, and then allowing a boardwalk to come through the marsh that then came to a bird hide that, let's say, Johnny in the year 2020 helped build it with the local school, and Johnny actually noticed a bird that hadn't been there for, let's say, 20 to 25 years, and he saw it and he noted it and he took a picture of it, and it made national news, and it then made the estate better well known in England, and the nation took pride in Dartington and took pride in the fact that people are out there trying to conserve biodiversity and bring biodiversity back into their hearts. So that's the understanding maybe from the marsh, and I've only had 6 weeks to have a look at the marsh, but if we deeply look into how we can reconnect people to the marsh and allow nature to thrive there, we could really make a difference for the country in itself. So then moving up into the next phase, let's say 2020, and looking at those fields just below us, how could we keep the fences there for now, and then also create projects where we could rewild local and indigenous plants into that land, that then allowed to connect the two different forests together, and create a space for biodiversity to move around. This is a very idealistic way of looking at something, and because of financial problems and issues that are facing the farmer at the moment, the farmer can't afford to just give his land away to rewild. So now we need to look at economic viabilities that would allow for us to rewild that space, and that's everything from maybe creating festivals where people, where Dartington community over there and the Totnes community came into the land and worked together on the land and helped build trees in that space over there, which would help connect the community and to the land and to themselves and to the people that are on the land. That's a project which you could potentially make revenue, in the sense that you could get people to camp somewhere on the estate, and then they came to the festival where they planted trees, and in the evening they maybe had a party. You could also think of other ideas, maybe creating a tree nursery where we built a space where we could create tree seedlings and then sell them along the country, and that would help rewild different parts of the country in itself. These are just some ideas to how we could begin to grow this space from an economic point of view. Finally, in terms of the long-term vision, Dartington has so much in the past of innovation. This estate is known for creating many acts of innovation. So how can we know this and act on it? Because the Almas of their time were incredibly important. They made a really big difference to this estate. They created, they innovated a farmland and intensive agriculture so that it could feed the populations of England. I probably wouldn't be here today, and many of us wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for their thinking, because they needed to feed the nation. So although that was terrible for biodiversity, we're now in a space where we can make a difference in terms of bringing biodiversity back in an innovative point of view from Dartington. And the Atmos project, which is right by the railway station, is a national exemplar where people can come down on the train and have a look at what they're doing in terms of community participation and economic well-being. So how could this estate also look to bring biodiversity back and create a national exemplar for people to come down and experience nature and experience what they're doing to change the story that we have at the moment, in the present. And very significantly, the River Dart runs just next to the estate, and it runs into Dartmoor, and this is the artery of Dartmoor. And if we begin to work with the river in such a way to reconnect biodiversity to the river, we could potentially over many years begin to develop this as a model for the farms next to us, which then could rewild the land and create a space for more biodiversity. We could even in the future reintroduce different species like the pine marten, which likes to kill squirrels, which we've got a big problem on the estates in terms of grey squirrels taking over and killing the trees. So they could regulate those numbers and help for the trees to grow. And eventually this wilderness could move up into Dartmoor and help rewild Dartmoor and give it back some life that it needs. Not that I think that Dartmoor isn't beautiful. I just think that, you know, there's a lot of grazing and in itself agriculture on a national park, and if we could think about a space where that national park doesn't have fences on it, and it doesn't have ponies and sheep that are just grazing on it, but it's got wild animals walking around it. And in the future, I would love to think that a Eurasian lynx could be reintroduced into Dartmoor, where it has free range space to walk around and live its own life. So these are just some of the things that I've been looking into over the last 6 weeks, and how we can begin to make a difference for our landscape. To allow the landscape to dream through us rather than dream for it and make decisions for it. I think it's time that we begin to make a change in the way that we think and feel towards landscape, and allow the landscape to think and feel for us. And this means getting out there and experiencing it firsthand rather than rationally understanding it. Anyway, thank you very much.